As you can see here, there is an example of a Python program here, and this is a Python program that I usually use, a very simple Python program that would illustrate the use of function definitions with parameters. Now this is a Python code, and I want to run the program and take a look on what will happen. So I will click here, run. There is a run current script here, and you can also press F5, and you will notice from the output window here, okay, the one that I highlighted is actually displaying 10 symbols that is actually considered as the parameter, okay, passing by parameter here. So you will notice that the syntax and the codes here are in English-like structure, and you might wonder, how did the compiler or this Python program was able to execute the program in such a way that it will display these 10 stars? Okay, so all of us should wonder why this was actually being displayed in such a way that we are just simply using a simple program here with the use of Python. Take note of what I said. I compiled it to be able to be executed by the compiler itself, or the Python, so we can see the correct solution or the required output. Let me give another an example. The first time that I came here in Indonesia, of course, it's not easy to learn the Bahasa Indonesia, or the language, okay, Bahasa. So I need to take a look and download in my cell phone or in my computer, even in my iPad, the translators that I need. So I'm going to close this one, and then let's take a look at this Google Translate. And if you notice here, I want to translate what is the meaning of learn, okay, learn in Bahasa Indonesia. So the correct word here is belajar, belajar. Let's take a look at the pronunciation. Of course, there is a pronunciation for this. Let me play for you.
Belajar.
Belajar. So from English to Bahasa Indonesia, there is a translation. Okay, that's simply learn. How about if I'm going to place their compute, since we are dealing with the computers. So if you notice here, compute means menghitung. So that is in the example. Let me try to take a look. Menghitung. So translating from English to Indonesian, or Bahasa Indonesia. Now that would lead me to our topic about language translators. That is just to give you a simple analogy, or a simple comparison with that of what we call language translators. In this case, since we are talking here about computers, it's not about the language, or it is not about the different languages of different countries that we're going to translate, but this is talking about computer programs. You might notice here in our first slide, there's a lot of computer programs that are actually being used here, being displayed, or considered as different programming softwares or languages. Okay, now my key discussion for today is all about the assembler software for the installation of an assembly language program. Okay, we need what we call assembler if we're going to talk about assembly language programming. We are going to talk also about what is a compiler for the translation of a high-level language program. Okay, assembler software is you're going to translate an assembly language program into its equivalent machine code. Okay, and of course the last one is we have what we call the interpreter for translation and execution of a high-level language program. So we're going to talk about these three different language translators. Now, why do we need to translate software programs, or we call it source code? And of course, we need to execute the programs. We need to look at what we call this one, the output, okay, needed by the program, because when you talk about programming, this is actually considered as an instruction that you would ask the computer to do. Okay, Instructions in a program can only be executed when written in machine code. Take note, yeah, it's considered as digital systems. Our computer is considered as a digital computer. So in effect, this is actually, we are going to make use of what we call zeros and ones, the language of computers, the binaries. Programming instructions written in any programming languages other than machine code must be translated before they can be used. So it's just like in the case of using a different languages. So when I came here, of course, I could not barely understand how to speak in Bahasa, or when I'm going to interact with the locals or the community. So you need at least also to translate, a translator. So nowadays we have a lot of gadgets, we have a lot of apps that we can use to translate one language to the other languages. Okay, so that is in effect, yeah, in order for us to communicate and in order for us to understand one another. Okay, so we need what we call language translators also. That is in the context of communication, basic communication with different what goes on. If you are, for example, just like me, I'm here in Indonesia, so it is very important to know the language, yeah, and learn the language definitely. Okay, in like manner, for the computers or computer programs to be executed, this needs to be converted or translated into its equivalent machine code, because it's only zeros and ones that is actually being understood by the computers. Okay, the system software used to translate source program written in any language other than the machine codes are translators. So they are actually considered as translators. So we're going to discuss three different translators later on. Okay, next would be, what is this source code I just mentioned a while ago? Of course, it is a program that is written by a programmer. That is a very ordinary layman's term definition. It's very easy to understand. Of course, it is written by a programmer. And of course, when you see a source code, uh, that depends on the programming languages that is being used. If you use what we call low-level languages or assembly language programming, or high-level, okay, high-level languages. And nowadays, most of the programming languages that we are using, especially that we are using now what we call Python, it is under the category of high-level programming language. So if it's high-level programming language, you will notice that the syntax are closely related to the English grammar. Now, English grammar, how could this be interpreted or being understood by the computer? So you need what we call language translators in the context of computers. So, of course, case-to-case basis, that every programming languages has their own syntax. Okay, and this needs to be followed by the programmer. For example, you are using C++, okay, one of the very very basic, and at the same time the fundamental of all programming languages, the C or C++. Okay, there are certain rules or syntax that are actually being used when you're going to use C++ as your programming languages, in like manner also with that of Python. So it's it's different from different syntax from different programming languages. That's already a given fact. Now let's take a look at an example here. So if you notice, this example here is, this one is under C++. Okay, I used to use this kind of what we call this one, programming software, whenever we have what we call interfacing, way back when I was still in the college. Okay, so it's very straightforward, only that the problem in C++ is it's really very hard coding. You need to code everything. Okay, starting from just creating a small dot or maybe a circle, it is actually a lot of codes. Okay, so although it's very readable already, easy to understand, because most of the syntax are in English-like structure or grammar. And more specifically with the advent of Python. So if you notice here, this is a Python code, and look at the syntax of the if else function here, and you can see an English statements here, print. Okay, if we also have else if or else, closely related to the English grammar. Question is, how could the computer understand these different grammars here? I mean, different syntax here. So there should be a way to translate this into its equivalent zeros and ones, or simply the machine code. Next, we have the object code. So that's one of the considered as term that needs to be understood and at the same time to be remembered by the students whenever we talk about language translators. Object code. What is this object code? A computer system is not able to execute source code programs without the source code first being translated into a machine executable code. Okay, so it's very what they call this one, very technical in nature, or simply it's the machine code. Okay, all programs need to be translated before they can be executed. So meaning it's a must that if you want to run a program, it should be translated into its equivalent machine code, because you are communicating directly with the computer or a machine that will only understand zeros and ones. Okay, object code is also very synonymous to machine code. So there are some discussions in our textbook that object code is synonymously a term that is having the same what you call this one, meaning with that of the machine code. Okay, it requires the services of a linker program which combines sets of object code and resolves references, thereby creating a complete executable program. So if object code, they are closely related to the machine code, so definitely this is the goal of the language translators. Object code and machine code are being generated. Now, the exact process of creating machine executable code through translation, of course, differs or depending whether what source code or syntax we use. So it can be compiled, it can be interpreted or assembled. We're gonna look on the differences of this compiler, interpreter, or assembler. In this case, these are now considered as the three languages, the most common, or simply the three basic, okay, language translators that we often use whenever we do programming. Let's start with assembler, because this is one of the earliest programming software or programming language that was created. Now, programs written in assembly language are translated to a machine code by an assembler program. So you need what we call an assembler program. Now, what is an assembler program? Let me take a look at this one. We have one kind of an assembler program here, but this is just considered as an emulator. So as you can see on the screen, let me try to open an example. Let's say translate hello world to print. Yeah, usually in every programming language, when you want to learn a programming language, the most obvious and the most common program that is being taught by a teacher is how to display hello world, print welcome to Python, print welcome to C++. If you try to take a look at this code, this is already considered as an assembly language program. Okay, you cannot barely understand it if you don't have any background with assembly language programming. Yes, this is also one of my subject when I was in college, and wow, it's a pretty challenging programming language. But most of the applications of assembly language programming is that our embedded systems. Okay, and we usually use this assembly language program whenever we program the PIC, the programmable interrupt controller, the PIC F84, PIC F84. Usually that's the name of the IC. Okay, so not going further on that. So just to give you an idea, and then we just want to execute this one. So we need to emulate. You will notice that it will generate its equivalent object code, or simply the hexadecimal code already. So this part here, okay, this part here, the one that I'm showing with the cursor, there is an hexadecimal equivalent of the opcodes and operands of this particular program, simply just to display the word hello world. And of course, yeah, you notice here, of course, this is very advanced, okay, checking on just to give you an idea how it is being assembled. So you need an assembler software, okay, for you to assemble that one. Usually, I use what we call, let me run that program, emulate, and then let us run the program. Then you will notice, yeah, you will notice that the hello world was actually being executed. If you try to take a look there, it is a lot of programs or mnemonics and assembly language instructions that was used. All right, there's another programming language that I usually use, the MASM32. Okay, this is what we call the Microsoft Assembler or MASM32. So this is also using what we call this one, assembly language program. Yes, of course, from the word alone, yeah, MASM or Microsoft Assembler. So Microsoft has their own what we call this one, language translators or assembly language program. Now, assemblers either store the program directly in the main memory ready for execution as it is translated, or they store the translated program in storage medium to be used later. So this is usually the application when the program is already being stored in the memory or in the CPU itself for embedded systems. Okay, there is a what they call this one, programmable interrupt controller, wherein when you burn the program there inside the CPU, in that inside that PIC, um, well, it resides there, and whatever instructions that was uh, downloaded, then of course, dependent on the application that you're going to create. Assemblers, if it's stored for later use, then a loader program is also needed to load the stored translated program into main memory before it can be executed. So the MASM32 can be used. So I just mentioned a while ago the MASM32. Okay, it is used by 8086 family of computers. Okay, and PIC, I just mentioned the PIC, and Genie are used for microcontrollers. So just want you to have an idea of the PIC, what it goes on, assembly program. Okay, take a look at the program here. It's very different with that of the standard one. Of course, this PIC, okay, you need to learn the data sheet and how does programmable interrupt controller works, because they have different syntax also whenever you're going to create an assembly language program to be downloaded or burned. Usually we call that one burning of the files. We burn or simply download the assembly language program to the IC itself. All right. How about for the compilers and interpreters? Okay. Programs written in high-level language can be either translated into a machine code by compiler program, or you can directly execute line by line using an interpreter program. So in the first discussion a while ago, compilers and interpreters, these are considered as translators that are being used by high-level programming languages. Compilers usually store the translated program or object program on a storage medium ready to be executed later. Of course, the same, yeah. A loader program is needed to load. So in the first start of this discussion, I actually compiled or run the script of the function definition with parameter sample program. Okay, so we didn't know. We cannot see how it is being compiled because that is already an integral part of the Python whenever you run the script. So there is a small program inside the program itself on how to compile these English-like statements or syntax into its equivalent object code or machine code. With interpreter, no translated program is generated in main memory. Why? As it has been mentioned a while ago, you can execute it directly the program line by line. Okay, So from the word alone, interpreter. Whenever, for example, let's say in a beauty pageant or in any contest, yeah, there are some instances that some candidates cannot barely cannot barely talk in English. The problem there is, the solution there is that together with them, okay, there is an interpreter. So whenever a certain person will speak one sentence, the interpreter who is beside with her or with him will translate it per sentence or line by line. Probably that is actually considered as the reason why we call it an interpreter, language translator. Okay, so it interprets or executes the program line by line. Now, of course, doesn't need any main memory. Every line in the program is interpreted, then executed each time the program is run. So compilers, you just compile as a whole block of program, then it will be executed. For interpreter, you're not going to compile it as a whole block of program, but it will be executed line by line. Okay, these are examples of high-level programming languages. So you might have an idea which of these programming languages are considered as high-level programming languages. Okay, so of course for assembly language or low-level assembly language programming, that's where the assembly language belongs. Of course, most of these are considered as very familiar to you. Of course, we have C++, Java, C Sharp, PHP, Python, JavaScript. Oh, the C programming language still there, Perl. Okay, and then of course for visual programming or creating an interfaces, we usually consider the Visual Basic. Okay, now examples of high-level programming languages class are Java, Python, Visual Basic. So usually, I think in the Cambridge AS and A-level exam, these are the recommended programming languages that is going to be part of the discussion in computer science. In our case, we're going to make use of Python programming. Okay, so I will leave this to you also. You read this one in the PowerPoint. The similarities and differences between assemblers, compilers, and interpreters. So this is just a summary now of what we discussed earlier. Okay, that ends our discussion about language translators. Thank you very much and see you to the next topic.